we're looking at the last battle in the Chronicles of Narnia. Unfortunately, our last class on that series. Sorry for cutting it short for those of you who love Narnia, but we have other books to get to. And I wanted to look at the last battle because it brings together, obviously it's the last book in the series, and it brings together many of the ideas and themes of the whole Chronicles of Narnia. So we looked at the first book that was written, although not the first in the series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We did look at the first in the series as well, The Magician's Nephew, and we looked at The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And I like the other ones, and the other ones are worth discussing as well, for sure. But I only had 4 classes, and rather than do 7 books badly in 4 classes, I thought I'd do 4 books a little less badly in 4 classes. I could spend more than 1 class on each book. But again, it's not supposed to be exhaustive. It's supposed to give you a sense of some of the main themes and themes that run throughout Lewis's writing as well. This course is on Lewis, trying to understand the man, and it occurred to me that one of the things that I probably have said but need to reiterate is in Lewis, we are meeting a man who is not like modern scholars in the sense that, not that he's a Christian, because there are Christian scholars in our day, but in the sense that he is very much of an integrationist in his approach, which Christian universities and stuff talk about a lot, but they actually find very difficult to practice. And the reason why is because integration in its fullest sense is not just taking your faith and a very narrow slice of the academic world, which is your specialism, and putting those two things together. It's a very large base of knowledge in which everything connects to everything else. And that's something that Lewis was capable of doing. He had an enormous breadth of knowledge, and everything connected to everything else. And this is why I, for a 1-semester course on Lewis, wanted to look at different types of works that he wrote. Not just his imaginative literature, his fiction, I mean it's an English class, but also his apologetic works, which are often taken on their own, and even in his works of literary criticism, which most people ignore altogether. I think they're all related, and most obviously so because they come from the same man. I mean, sometimes you read people and you think that you were dealing with Lewis the philosopher, Lewis the author of fiction, Lewis the child who has had a bad upbringing, Lewis the war vet. This is a good book, by the way. There are all manner of narrow windows into looking at Lewis, but the holistic ones drop out, and particularly the ones that are able to connect things and think the way Lewis thought. It's a very difficult thing to do. That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm not doing it particularly well, but at least we're pushing in the right direction, at least I think. So The Last Battle is the last book in the series, and he does with that pull together the main thrust of his concerns in the whole Narnia Chronicles, I think. And at the same time, he also connects it with ideas and themes that were important to him throughout. So education, one that I mentioned by beginning the whole course with the abolition of man. It's just a short series of 3 lectures. I just think it's addressing the way we look at the world. And the specialization of academia is only one of the problems of academia. And the problem with specialization is not only that you don't know anything else, but it's very difficult to know whether your area of expertise is actually in the realm of truth anymore because it's not connected to anything else. So there's no way of disproving it. Within a discipline, people can agree amongst themselves that this is the way things are, but since there's no breadth within the discipline and no other considerations are besides those that the discipline has decided are acceptable to the discipline, so many historians only read history, and many philosophers only read philosophy, and many theologians only read theology, and what constitutes theology is a very narrow band. At the end of the day, they've cut out all the things that might challenge and cause them to amend their views. And for Lewis, this is particularly concerning the field of science. And so he critiqued scientism in The Abolition of Man and in other writings. It was not that he was opposed to science. He was, on the contrary, very much supportive of it, because science is knowledge. But it must give way to larger notions than merely empirical observation. It has to comport and agree with concepts of truth. And the last battle is very much about truth, believe it or not. And it's truth in the context of very certain things. And the very certain thing that is the context is the end of Narnia and the last king of Narnia. The number 7 in it plays an important role. It's the 7th book in the series, of course, but Tyrion is not who the children first think he is. He's not Rilian. 200 years have passed since Rilian's death. He's in fact the 7th king from Rilian's line, and he's the last of the kings of Narnia. And his world is coming to an end. So the last battle is really the last battle within Narnia. Now, one of the temptations, I think, within it is to see this as a direct Christian allegory. And I think there is some substance for that. Some substance. But Lewis insists that he does not write Christian allegory. He does use Christian themes. There's no doubt about it. And he does use Christian symbols. But he is not, in fictional form, drawing a direct parallel, let alone a commentary on the Bible. Like as in the, what was that series a few decades ago? The Left Behind series, which is work of fiction, right? Purportedly speculating on certainties of the ways of reading Scripture. That's not what's going on in The Last Battle. It's nothing like that. It's looking at the themes of consummation, of redemption, of conclusion and purpose and meaning and truth and all of those things. They're in there. And there are Christian figures in there. In fact, in many ways, The Last Battle is the most Christian of books. In its references. They're talking about the stable, and there was once a baby in a manger who's bigger than the whole world. I mean, it's so more explicit reference to a world outside Narnia, in which it relates to Narnia through the truth of the Christian faith. It's more explicit there in The Last Battle, for which reason, if you're a Christian reader, you might like it more, and if you're not, you might like it less. I don't know. And people have taken it a little bit too much to be writing as a Christian and only for Christians. That's the charge from the one side. So Philip Pullman, I meant to bring his book, or his books. There's a trilogy of children's novels called the His Dark Materials trilogy, and he hates Lewis. He really does, and writes a trilogy of books which are roughly speaking correspondent to 3 books that we're not reading by Lewis, namely his sci-fi trilogy. And he is challenging the view of life that Lewis presents in his series, which Pullman finds to be mean and contemptible. And if you want to see the idea of gender identity being promoted very early in children's literature, it's in that book. And you have a daemon, and every person has one of these things, and that's your identity and so forth. We're moving into Gnosticism and so forth in Pullman. He doesn't like Tolkien, or rather, he doesn't like Tolkien either, but Lewis's muscular Christianity he can't stand. But I'm not going to get off track on that. We could talk about Pullman and the reception of Lewis's work. I do want to give a sense that what Lewis is doing in this book, very much, as I say, it's related to truth. And that is presented in various ways, but one of the ways in which it's presented is right at the outset, with the introduction of two odd figures, Shift and Puzzle, one being an ape and the other being an ass. Donkey. In Britain, they would be happy to say ass without any sort of connotations of your backside. And Shift is a false prophet of sorts. He deceives the people of Narnia who think that Aslan has come. Now, if you recall, a lion's pelt pours downstream, and Shift manipulates poor Puzzle, Shift being the brighter of the two by far, and a wise old, or allegedly wise, he's certainly old, an old ape. Shrewd is probably the better word, and has probably concocted a plan, and probably in league with others. We're not told this for sure, but there's a sense that this may have been actually a setup. So there just happens to be a lion's pelt that comes down the stream, and Shift convinces Puzzle to get it into the water to get it, and then they strap it on Puzzle, and then Shift comes up with the idea you could deceive people and speak as Aslan, and what good could we do with that? Shift, or Puzzle for his part, bridles at the very thought of it. He's terrified, not only of the judgment of Aslan, but the idea of deceiving other people he finds very concerning. It doesn't concern Shift because Shift thinks that he can do good things by appearing to be authoritative, by using the name of Aslan and the appearance of Aslan. He can do good things. And he talks about all manner of things that he can do with that. What's interesting is that I think Shift in some ways uses the language of the conditioners that Lewis speaks of in The Abolition of Man. And the terms of morality and your treatment of your fellow creatures as equals to you, he throws out the window. In fact, he presents himself as a man, not an ape. Explicitly says that he is a man. They're deceived that he's an old ape. He's not an old ape, he's a man. So at the outset, there is this sense of deceit. And deceit, however, which has the efficacy of truth because people think that it's Aslan and therefore they ought to obey it. And so the challenge right at the outset is in understanding how this can possibly be Aslan, because what's being ordered is the destruction of Narnia. Even the cutting down of trees and the enslavement of the Narnians and so forth. And furthermore, there are other signs. I'll read you one, the famous one in which this is introduced at the beginning, when a great golden-bearded centaur comes in to the scene, Runewit. And the king asked, "Do you bring us more news of Aslan?" Runewit looked very grave, frowning a little. The chapter is titled "The Rashness of the King." It's chapter 2. And he says, "Sire, you know how long I have lived and studied the stars. For we centaurs live longer than you men, and even longer than your kind unicorn. Never in all my days have I seen such terrible things written in the skies as there have been nightly since this year began. The stars say nothing of the coming of Aslan, nor of peace, nor of joy. I know by my art that there have not been such disastrous conjunctions of the planets for 500 years. And so he says that those who are saying Aslan has come are lying. And at that, the king grasps for his sword. A lie? said the king fiercely. What creature in Narnia or all the world would dare to lie on such a matter? And without knowing it, he laid his hand on his sword hilt. That I know not, Lord King, said the centaur, but I know there are liars on earth. There are none among the stars. But here's the problem. And this is the thing that he spends a great deal of time discussing, this issue. I wonder, said Jewel, whether Aslan might not come through all the stars, though all the stars foretold otherwise. He is not the slave of the stars, but their maker. Is it not said in all the old stories that he is not a tame lion? Well said, Jewel, cried the king. Those are the very words, not a tame lion. It comes in many tales. Okay, so this is the issue then. They realize that Aslan, being the creator, is not a creature, and therefore he's not bound by this. The question is, can he act contrary to his creation? Clean contrary, and not just his creation, but the Tao. He's very puzzled by this. The appearances suggest this, and they're all longing for this. There's a sense at this stage, with the last king, that the world has become dark, and in very many ways in a desperate state. But the confusion has crept in, and it's confusion which is caused by a false prophet of sorts, in the name of Aslan speaking. But the question is, can he contradict the Tao? So he doesn't frame it that way, but we who've read enough of Lewis, that's the issue. And the answer is, of course he can, because he's Aslan. What can he not do? He's not bound by the Tao. If this is true, then he's not bound by the conditions of truth and beauty and goodness, or even, more importantly, justice. Is he bound by the usual rules of justice? Can he not do with the creation what he will? Can he not just desecrate the earth? And the believers, and the wisest among them, and at this point, there's a division amongst the wise. The centaur says the stars never lie. The planets never lie, because they're fixed. And they always prophesy this. There's always a correlation between the order that God has created and the creator. There is a direct connection there. And then men lie, and beasts may lie, speaking beasts, but nature does not lie. It is created, and there's an order to it, which we can understand and he can foresee. So he's clear on it, the centaur. But the men, and the best of men, Tyrion, and the unicorn, the best of beasts in many ways, are confused on the matter. Perhaps he can, because he's not a tame lion. Now, I've heard this in Christian circles. Can God not do things that, all things? He's all powerful. If he chooses it, if he says it, is it not possible? This is called divine command theory, by the way, when it operates opposite to a moral order, to the order of creation. Right? Remember, God creates first, and then he redeems the creation. Does the created order not have a goodness in it, even though it's fallen, that God, who calls it good, is in some sense bound by? When he calls it good, he's calling it good because it comports with his predication of goodness. It's good because he calls it good. It remains good. It's fallen, but it's still good. And our sense of justice in this, and everything that Lewis defended in the Tao, is connected to that. Either it holds true or it's not true. And that Tyrion and at this point, what's the name? Jewel, are confused, and they're not certain. And they're not the only ones that are going to say this. In fact, the other creatures will actually say the exact same. They keep reiterating, he's not a tame lion, he's not a tame lion, he's not a tame lion. Various forms. The reason Lewis writes on this, and it's important to him, is his own context. And I held up this book by Joseph LeConte, A Hobbit, a Wardrobe, and a Great War, talks about the crucible of the First World War in which Lewis and Tolkien both went as soldiers and saw horrific things. But part of that context is the context of the great powers that were caught up in that war. And on each side, each European country did it in the name of Christ. This is the thing that was most troubling to many. So I'm just going to read a little snippet here from LeConte, and he's commenting on the last battle. It's called The Last Battle at any rate, the chapter. And he notes this: a holy war against an unholy power. The result, according to the Allied clergy, would be nothing less than the political and spiritual rebirth of Western culture. The autocracies and petty kingdoms of Europe would give way to the self-governing ideals of liberal democracy. Materialism would yield to the spiritual values of Christianity. Those were the terms in which the First World War was couched. Returning from a diplomatic mission to Russia in 1917, former U.S. Secretary of State Elihu Root went on a nationwide lecture tour telling audiences that America was destined to lead, quote, this upward progress of humanity along the pathway of civilization to a true Christian life. And advocates of the social gospel were especially hopeful. They imagined the war as a cleansing experience, a means to purge entire societies of their sub-Christian loyalties. It'll make them more spiritual. An Allied victory would ensure a progressive future for the United States and Europe. Lyman Abbott, one of the best-known liberal theologians of his day, envisioned progressive redemption as a result of the war. Americans were working hard, quote, to banish those crimes against humanity from our civilization. He said, and to bring about, quote, the triumph for Christianity such as the world has never before known. It's going to happen through war. Sense that a disastrous, dooming thing will, in some sense, lead to progress. So, and progressive clergy, not the fundamentalists, not the traditionalists, but the progressive clergy were particularly prone to convert the conflict into a culturally and spiritually transformative event. They used disasters, natural disasters and otherwise. So the progressives amongst Christians are the most wedded to doom and gloom, because they say a spiritual transformation that is coming on the other side of the darkness. So we will want to destroy even, throw ourselves into it. Now, he presents this, does LeConte, on the side of England, in which the language was that we are the salt of the earth. In America, where they spoke of America as a city on a hill. And in Germany, God is with us and with the German people, because we're, again, the most progressive and enlightened. And Germany was the most advanced of all the Western powers in every sense, culturally, economically, materially, everything but perhaps spiritually. But there wasn't a spiritual superiority on the Allied side per se either. All of them, though, fought in the name of Christ, ironically, or terribly. So I say that simply because the last battle is about false prophecy and being led by those who purport to be bringing about the kingdom of God. Again, these are the progressives amongst Christians. These are not the traditionalists. These are not the social conservatives. It's the progressives. And there are very different rationales from different branches, of course, but that one is dominant. And for the generation that grew up between 1914 and 1918, which is Tolkien and Lewis, they felt that they'd been sold a false prospectus about the glory of battle and the sweetness of dying in the service of their country. There are these posters, famous one, Lord Kitchener pointing at the person on the other side of it, your country needs you, right? You. And men in droves, hundreds of thousands, going to the front and fighting and throwing themselves in a protracted battle in trenches where the battle lines don't even move, and dying in huge numbers. And some of them, as a result of this, and it's not just some, a whole generation is disenchanted by this. So this is the great loss of faith. They went into it with faith, in faith that they were doing God's will. They came out of it having seen the atrocities done in the First World War, saying, enough of all that. And men like Lewis and Tolkien, who were also there, didn't have the same pessimism, or at least it took a while for Lewis to overcome his pessimism, because they saw terrible things for no reason, and certainly not for God, and not for glory. So when he, in The Abolition of Man, we saw when he says, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori, it's sweet and lovely to die for your fatherland, he would have heard those same words himself when he went to war. And they would have clung false to him and his generation. And yet he thinks that they're true. Remember, it's in the context of the Second World War, and he thinks that it's connected to the Tao. So how is then he going to present this here? Because this is the last battle, and we have now clearly a false prophet leading people astray. What do we do with this? Well, the predominant, and I mentioned this book as well last time, and I mentioned it again because I think it's a very good book, Planet Narnia, The Seven Heavens and the Imagination of C.S. Lewis, or also the Narnia Code by Michael Ward. He argues, and I think I'm convinced by it, although I'm not just repeating his argument here, I'm adding it to the themes and ideas that I've presented on the course. He argues that the beginning of the last battle is under the influence of Saturn. Saturn, if you can see on the image here, and I'm not sure if you can see it. Let's see if I can kill the light here, and maybe it will help a bit. I don't know if that helps or not. But it's the outermost sphere before the stellatum, the realm of the stars, and the prima mobile. But it's the planet at the height. It begins under that. Now, what are the features of Saturn? Well, let me go back and we'll look at what he talked about in the discarded image. And I didn't actually discuss these in any detail there, but I bring them to your attention if you want to go back and have a look at this. The characters of the 7 planets, have a look for yourselves. So pages 105 to 108 or 9. Yeah, about 10. So 105 to 109. But this is what he says about Saturn. These are the characteristics of the 7 planets, or the characters of them. Saturn, in the earth, his influence produces lead. In men, the melancholy complexion. So despondency, a tendency to see things in a dark way. In history, disastrous events. In Dante, his sphere is the sphere of the heaven of contemplatives. And if you ever read Milton's L'Allegro and Il Penseroso, these are 2 different contrasting sides. L'Allegro is jovial and cheerful, we might say, and whereas the Il Penseroso, the thoughtful, is the melancholic. And so one's connected with comedy and the other's connected with tragedy. And both of them are connected with the 2 figures that are in the last battle, but it begins primarily with Saturn, the character of Saturn. And the turning point is when the king dies. At that point it shifts, and suddenly it becomes jovial under the influence of Jupiter. But let me continue with Saturn. So it's the heaven of contemplatives. He, that is Saturn, is connected with sickness and old age. Our traditional picture of Father Time with the scythe, note that Father Time's in the last battle as well. We find him in the silver chair as well. He's chained down here, but now he's no longer chained. He gets up, blows the trumpet. With the scythe is derived from early pictures of Saturn, a good account of his activities in promoting fatal accidents, pestilence, treacheries, and ill luck in general occurs in The Knight's Tale by Chaucer. He is the most terrible of the seven and is sometimes called the great infortune, infortunata major. I hate when that happens, because I think I have to then retype this silly thing. Turn that off. Okay. I'll just move this every 2 seconds. Infortunata major, so the great infortune. Now, that sounds wholly negative. It's not wholly negative. But those characteristics of sickness and old age, fatal accidents, pestilence, treacheries, ill luck in general, how does the last battle, what's the backdrop for the children being there? It's a train accident, which transports the children into this particular image. Is it the end of the world? No, it's the end of the children. And they are brought into this world. But it's not about the end of the earth per se. I think Lewis is a little bit too reverent to be trying to present an alternative view of the end of all things. He's talking about the children and the relation of their stories, Narnia, to the story of all stories, the great tale of life with Aslan, eternal life. So those are Saturn. Now let me read Jupiter. As I say, Jupiter comes in at the point in the story when the king, what's the king's name again? Sorry? Tyrion. I was thinking really, and I knew it wasn't really Tyrion. When Tyrion dies, and at that point is transformed, and the picture then, and it's about 2/3 of the way in. So 2/3 of it is under the influence of Saturn. So it's malevolent, there's ill luck. There's a lot of reference to disastrous events, but there's also a great deal of contemplation. Tyrion is a very contemplative character. Runewit plays a strong role in this. The earth, repeated references to the coldness of the water and the coldness of the night. It's very cold. When you're old, you get cold. You can't get warm. It's as if the sun were dying. Got to be dressed up in warm blankets all the time and things. Anyway, Jupiter. Jupiter, the king, produces in the earth rather disappointingly tin, never mind. This shining metal said different things to the imagination before the canning industry came in, says Lewis, rather wittily. The character he produces in men would now be very imperfectly expressed by the word jovial. Lewis himself was a jovial man, cheerful. But it's more than that. It's more than mere l'allegro, as Milton puts it. And Milton's l'allegro is more than cheerful, quite frankly. And is not very easy to grasp. It is no longer like the Saturnine character, one of our archetypes. We may say it is kingly. How about that? Better. But we must not think of a king at peace, enthroned, taking his leisure, serene. The jovial character is cheerful, festive, yet temperate, tranquil, magnanimous, above all, great-spirited, gracious. When this planet dominates, we may expect halcyon days and prosperity. In Dante, wise and just princes go to this sphere when they die. He is the best planet and is called the greater fortuna major. Fortuna major. So Saturn was infortuna major. Jupiter is fortuna major. They're opposites in some ways. Both Lewis and Tolkien, brought up in the Great War, did not give in to the despair of their contemporaries, but their generation of contemporaries did. This is when there was a loss of faith in civilization amongst those that were just before triumphing and speaking about how war was going to bring about everlasting beatitude, more or less. The age of Aquarius is upon us, more or less. So these things have been said throughout the 20th century, almost more out of desperation than anything. And it's never marked by any of the signs of such a good age. But this is not unheard of historically, for people to believe that a really bad event is actually a really good thing, because it'll clean up things a lot, like climate change. Right? There's an element of, we like the destructiveness of this, and at the same time it's a terrible thing. The response to Lewis's fiction is that Lewis is writing, remember, he's writing children's fiction. It's a little bit too cheerful, and that reflects, go back to his critics, Lewis's own inability to cope with the loss of that debate by Elizabeth Anscombe, which now becomes the turning point in his whole life, as if he were such an egomaniac that losing an argument with a fellow Christian would somehow deflate him to the point where he had to retreat to writing kids' books and consoling himself and acting like a big fat boy, drinking beer and smoking a pipe. That's how his critics present him. And furthermore, a nasty little brute of a boy, because of course he condemns Susan to not get there. And that Pullman hates him. Probably imagines in Lewis people that he knows, who projects upon them, maybe think. I don't know. I think that rather than that, what Lewis is presenting is an imaginative recovery that will account for the dreadfulness of the world and not for a second flinch from the horrors of the 20th century and its false prophecies about progress. He goes after progress over and over and over again. And in Darwinism, it's not so much the theory, the biological theory, it's the commitment to the belief in progress that he is after. And he calls it the funeral of a great myth. What's the great myth? It's the myth of progress, and that's the one he really goes after. Because there, it's the death of all life, material life, in order to give way to a spiritual life. He finds this damnable falsehood. And note that the progressives and the conditioners want the same thing. In the sci-fi trilogy, in That Hideous Strength, they take a head from a man and want to give it life. So there's a transhumanism there. And they're willing to basically put the whole country under martial law in order to bring about this progress as well. Impose a sort of communist, just like we're observing right now in China, where they lock down the country. With approval from the Western world, by the way. They're still going to let the virus get out, but by all means lock them down. You should be worried about that, as well as the fact that they were not able to contain it. But Lewis is not defeated by the First World War, and in his spirit, he, thanks to the influence of some of his friends, particularly Tolkien, but also Hugo Dyson and others, sees that there is there's yet hope in the midst of all this. What has been buried is the human notion of progress. That myth of progress, that's what needs to die. And so he wants to explore truth. Now, the word truth in this, as I say, so how is this connected to prophecy? Well, Runewit makes it clear the stars never lie, but people do. Okay. Shift is one of those characters that lie, most obviously. What does Shift claim about Aslan? The very thing that ends and makes the decision for Tyrion, by the way, is the fact that the ape says that Aslan and Tash are one. Tash is Aslan. You can call him Tashlan if you want. It's at that point when Tyrion is persuaded where he was not by Runewit. And that's because there's a wisdom there. yes, the lion's not a tame beast. And we're not only going to go by what the heavens tell, because actually the stars were never, Lewis is not giving way to, he's not an astrologist. He's not saying if we want the truth, we just need to look up the heavens. Get your telescopes out and move to a dark area, and then you'll know the circuit of events. He says that there's influence there, but not determination. And again, even in the medieval church, there's no sense that the planets are deterministic, just influential. But there's always freedom for God to act within that context. However, the freedom is not absolute. He is bound by his own word. He cannot lie. He cannot contradict his character. When he calls something good, it cannot suddenly become not good. Fortune, the blessedness, cannot suddenly become cursedness. Right? So infortunata major will give way to fortunata major. Yes, but they're not contradictory. They cannot be. Otherwise, what God said was true is no longer true. And his character is no longer as they thought. And that's exactly what those two characters, Tyrion and his beloved unicorn, Jewel, say. If this is the end of all things, and if this is the sign of the coming of Aslan, it's as if water had no refreshment, if food lost its savor. There's nothing good. I thought Aslan was good. This is wicked. Right? And so they're uncertain. They're unwilling, in fact, and they have enough of a chest, by the way. Tyrion, having acted rashly because he's still a young man and slain the Calorman brutes who are, beating a Narnian horse, he ran them through, but he didn't announce, pull your swords out. It wasn't a fair fight. And so he hands himself over and he allows himself to be captured. Why? Not just because he did a bad thing, although that shows that he recognizes the Tao and it guides him. He's a man with a chest. It's more that if it's Aslan, then I will gladly die the life of a traitor because he's committed to the truth of the character of Aslan. And if I have done wrong here, which I have done by killing these men, I would rather die. Because at least I would die by the truth, a true way of looking at things. I would rather do that, as bad as the consequences are, than to accept the alternative, which is that there is no justice and that Aslan is false. I can't accept that. And then the turning point, when he is chained up, or he's or tied up, and he's in the midst of this ridiculous scene in which Shift is confronted by all these creatures wanting to see Aslan. So let me read from that section, because rather than me doing a paraphrase, let's use Lewis's own words here. It's in The Ape in Its Glory. So this is chapter 3. Now here's another thing the ape went on, fitting a fresh nut into its cheek. I hear some of the horses are saying, let's hurry up and get this job of carting timber over as quickly as we can, and then we'll be free again. Well, you can get that idea out of your heads at once. And not only the horses either. Everybody who can work is going to be made to work in future. Aslan has it all settled with the king of Calorman, the Tisroc, as our dark-faced friends, the Calormans, call him. All you horses and bulls and donkeys are to be sent down into Calorman to work for your living, pulling and carrying the way horses and such like do in other countries. And all you digging animals like moles and rabbits and dwarfs are going down to work in the Tisroc's mines, and no, howled the beasts, it can't be true. Aslan would never sell us into slavery to the king of Calorman. It would contradict his character. We're free beasts of Narnia. This would contradict. That can't be, they cry out, the free creatures. None of that. Hold your noise, said the Earp with a snarl. Who said anything about slavery? You won't be slaves. You'll be paid very good wages too. That is to say, your pay will be paid into Aslan's treasury, and he will use it all for everybody's good. Because who else would do a better job of looking after everyone else's good than Aslan? Then he glanced and almost winked at the chief Calormen. Of course, because they will be going sold into slavery. This is a vision of communism, by the way. Of course you'll work for a living, and it'll be for your good. You just won't be, the distribution will happen at the hands of the state. By the way, when you are taxed, you're working for the government. You're not working for yourself. The more your taxes go up, the less free you are as a person to work for yourself and your own good, and trusting to the good that will come to you from the state. Tax, by the way, taxation, the power of taxation is the power of sovereignty. I can't tax you. Or I could, but it's not, you're not going to accept it. There'll be an A tax. Anyone wants an A can pay me a little extra. I call that corruption, right? If you don't want to pay as much, I'll give you a B tax. You can get a B with it. Right? Power of taxation is the power of sovereignty. The acceptance of sovereignty of the government over its people is a limited sovereignty. Whereby is it limited? In the state in which Tash, or rather the ape is going to bring about, in conjunction with Calormen, they will be taxed 100% because all of their wages will go to Aslan, and then he'll distribute it. Remember, this is the context in which Lewis is writing as well. There are communist countries. There still are, by the way. And its influence is growing in our country as well. But then he looked and he winked, almost winked at the chief Calormen, and the Calormen bowed and replied in the pompous Calormen way, "Most sapient mouthpiece of Aslan, the Tisroc, may he live forever, is wholly of one mind with your lordship in this judicious plan." "There, you see," said the ape, "it's all arranged, and all for your own good. We'll be able, with the money you earn, to make Narnia a country worth living in. There'll be oranges and bananas pouring in," of course the ape's first thought, "and roads and big cities and schools and offices and whips and muzzles and saddles and cages and kennels and prisons." Oh, everything. Yeah, it goes from better to worse all along. The last thing he said was the most true of the whole lot. Because again, in the communist countries, the economic outcome is the poverty, growing poverty of the vast majority, the wealth of the conditioners who are running the whole show, and eventually prison for those who dissent, and execution. That's the legacy of communism. If you don't believe me, just open a history book. "But we don't want all those things," said an old bear. "We want to be free, and we want to hear Aslan speak himself." "Now don't you start arguing," said the ape, "for it's a thing I won't stand. I'm a man. You're only a fat, stupid old bear. What do you know about freedom? You think freedom means doing what you like? Well, you're wrong. That isn't true freedom. True freedom means doing what I tell you." There you go. Do what I tell you. That's freedom. "Huh?" grunted the bear and scratched its head. It found this sort of thing hard to understand. "Please, please," said the high voice of a woolly lamb, who was so young that everyone was surprised he dared to speak at all. "What is it now?" said the ape. "Be quick." "Please," said the lamb, "I can't understand. What have we to do with the Calormens? We belong to Aslan. They belong to Tash. They have a god called Tash. They say he has 4 arms and the head of a vulture. They kill men on his altar. I don't believe there's any such person as Tash. But if there was, how could Aslan be friends with him?" All the animals cocked their heads sideways, and all their bright eyes flashed towards the ape, because now we've pushed the real point here. They knew it was the best question anyone had asked yet. The ape jumped up and spat at the lamb. "Baby," he hissed, "silly little bleater, go home to your mother and drink milk. What do you understand of such things? But you others listen. Tash is only another name for Aslan. All that old idea of us being right and the Calormans wrong is silly. We know better now. The Calormans use different words, but we all mean the same thing. Tash and Aslan are only two different names for you know who. But that's why there can never be any quarrel between them. Get that into your heads, you stupid brutes. Tash is Aslan. Aslan is Tash. You know how sad your own dog's face can look sometimes? Think of that, and then think of all the faces of those talking beasts. And then the ginger cat comes in, and he comes straight up and says, excuse me, but this interests me. Does your friend from Calorman say the same? Assuredly, said the Calorman. The enlightened man, is in the right. Aslan means neither less nor more than Tash. Especially, Aslan means no more than Tash, suggested the cat. No more at all, said the Calorman, looking the cat straight in the face. Is that good enough for you, Ginger, said the ape. Oh, certainly, said Ginger coolly. Thank you very much. Okay. Ginger here is a sort of a theologian, and a theologian that's interested in the idea of how do the ideas of gods all hold together? Are they all just variations on the same thing? This view of theology is called inclusivism. Are they all just different names that different people use in different tongues for the same God? The answer is yes. At that point, the king, Tyrion, looking at the miserable faces of the Narnians, saw how they would all believe that Aslan and Tash were one and the same. He could bear it no longer. At that point, when he looks at his subjects and see that they're all being deceived, he says, "Ape!" he cried with a great voice, "You lie. You lie damnably. You lie like a Calorman. You lie like an ape." He meant to go on and ask how the terrible god Tash, who fed on the blood of his people, could possibly be the same as the good lion by whose blood all Narnia was saved. There's the blood. One sucks blood, eats blood, consumes blood, the blood of his own people. The other gave his blood. What could be a sharper contrast there? And then he gets taken away. But there's the point. He knows the character of the god at that point. Remember what early on what moved the little boy, Diggory, was the tears of the lion. And how he must, and how he had commanded him to do a good thing, whereas the witch had commanded a lie. So the same sort of thing is happening here. It's the knowledge of the character of the god, but also the fact that it can't break the Tau. So this is Lewis's insistence there at the beginning. It's here right at the end. Throughout, consistency. So it's possible for people to be deceived. It's possible for people to do bad things in the name of the truth. But it is not the case that the God in which many countries went to war is actually the true God. God does not command such things in such terms for the sake of progress, let alone progress that comes by the massacre of your fellow human beings without restraint for years on end, for no seeming purpose. Well, there was a purpose. The purpose was to advance progress. They explicitly called for the death and destruction of their enemies to advance religion. So that's the context there. I think it's quite important, to put it mildly. But then it gives way to the question of what happens at the end with this one figure, the noble Calorman, who wants so to serve his god that he wants to see him and go into this stable. Pipes up. You remember the scene. What's that boy's name? You remember? It's important. Emeth. What's that mean? Hebrew scholars. believe it's Hebrew. Truth. He doesn't know Aslan, but he loves the truth. Lewis is not making a comment about Christianity and Islam, I don't think. I know it's been taken that way, and there might be a tendency to apply and take Lewis to making a comment on that. I don't think he is. I think he's talking about false religion and Christianity. And false religions all fit under the same, and they all have a tendency to shed blood rather than to offer the blood of their God. They all command obedience. They all result in slavery. There is no freedom in countries that worship any other God other than Christ, any other God other than Aslan. Freedom is the result. These other religions, and so he's throwing them all in that same bit. Now, Emeth, on the other hand, he's talking about here about his observation, and this is the observation of the Christian world as well when it came across pagan cultures. What does it do with them? They're clearly worshiping idols, false gods. The Greeks and the Romans are polytheists. They even worship the state because the emperor is God on earth. And there's no other name under which men must bow, except that. So early Christians, they just have to take a pinch of incense, throw it on the fire, and say, Caesar is Lord. That's all they have to do. And then they can go on being religious all and carrying on and doing everything they want. That's all the Romans demanded of them. You just have to acknowledge the supremacy or the godhood of Caesar. That's all you have to do. And then you can be one of the gods in the pantheon of gods. It's fine. It doesn't matter to us. The Christians won't do it. Because to say that would be to include their God amongst the gods. They're not going to tolerate inclusivism. No, we won't do that. And the earliest Christian profession of faith is that Jesus is Lord. And it's a direct contradiction to Caesar is Lord. It's a direct. It would be understood. So he's not just one of the little gods that is in your pantheon that you're going to allow us to worship in our way. We won't have that because that would deny the truth. We can't deny the truth. We've seen it with our own eyes. We've seen what he did. He gave his own blood. He was raised from the dead. He ascended, right? And he now reigns. So we will die rather than to contradict that with our words. So what's going on with Emeth then? Well, Emeth it's a little complex here. He's not commenting on how Islamic people are basically worshiping Christ. They just don't know the name of Christ, but they're worshiping him. That's not what's going on there. I don't think so. I think he's talking about paganism and how there are aspects of it which are true. So when Christianity then goes, by the way, and it spreads out from the Mediterranean world and like begins in Jerusalem and then into Judea and then spreads out around Asia Minor and then eventually throughout the whole Roman Empire and then eventually goes on. And it encounters pagans. What do they do with the pagan people? Do they forbid them from worshiping their gods? Yes, they do. Does that mean they have to get rid of everything? No, they to some degree they do. And here's the model that was used by Augustine, recommended in Book 2 of his work on Christian teaching, which I deal with in my lit theory class, teaching. Remember, it's all about teaching again. De Doctrina, right towards the end of Book 2, he says that he uses an analogy. And the analogy is, what was Moses' command and the people of God commanded to do in the time of the Exodus? Well, to go out, leave. Get yourself out of here, absolutely. And there's a Passover and all that, right? But now you're to go. But there's something else that's commanded. Plunder the Egyptians. Take their jewels, take their gold, take their valuables with you. It's further commanded to the Egyptians, give the Hebrew slaves your gold, your jewels, etc. You give it to them, and they're glad. You take all this stuff. They take all this stuff. Now is that for a contemporary cultural commentator that doesn't really think in religious terms, this is just theft, and it's being legitimized in the Word of God. That's not how Augustine reads it, and I don't think that's how it's to be understood. It's how it's the goods there are commenting about the goods of the nations, and they are genuine goods. Remember, God created them too. They also bear the imago Dei. They also have some sense of beauty, truth, and goodness expressed in their culture. So when you come to them, acknowledge what's good there. It's not all bad just because they're unbelievers. Not all. There's an element of good there. So what do you do with that? Well, you take that gold, and then you, rather than dedicate it to demons, which is what Augustine regards the false gods as, demons in disguise, but rather dedicate it to the worship of the true God. But take the goods and baptize them, as it were. Use them for godly purposes. So what will they use them for? Well, if you go to the portrait of the temple, you'll see that it's inlaid with gold. Where do they get the gold from? The Egyptians. And the gold utensils, etc. That's what's going on here. Emeth has something of the truth, but even Emeth is confused about this fact. So now I wonder if I can find this passage, and I didn't mark it in my great meeting on Stable Hill. Emeth goes in, the pace quickens, the drum through the stable door. Is it that far? In which Emeth now meets Aslan. It's further up and further in, is it? What chapter is that? 14? No, it's not. 15. No, you're right at the beginning. Know, O warlike king, said Emeth, and you, O ladies, whose beauty illuminates the universe, that I am Emeth, the seventh son, note the seven again, of Harpha, Tarkhan, of the city of Tahishban, westward beyond the desert. I came lately into Narnia with 29 others under the command of Rishta Tarkhan. Now when I first heard that we should march upon Narnia, I rejoiced, for I heard many things of your land and desired greatly to meet you in battle. But when I found that we were to go in disguised as merchants, which is a shameful dress for a warrior and the son of a Tarkhan, and to work by lies and trickery, then my joy departed from me. And most of all, when I found we must wait upon a monkey, and when it began to be said that Tash and Aslan were one, then the world became dark in my eyes. So he's a foil for Tyrion. In that sense. All of these things, right? He doesn't like treachery. He's a man of truth. His name suggests his character even. For always since I was a boy I served Tasht, and my great desire was to know more of him, and if it might be to look upon his face. But the name of Aslan was hateful to me. But he's outraged at the idea that Aslan and Tash are one. Anyway, he gets put in there, and he goes and he falls at the feet of Aslan. This is another page on for sure. And then Aslan speaks to him. I fell at his feet, he says, and said, surely this is the hour of death. Because now he's meeting Aslan, and he's a follower of Tash. For the lion, who is worthy of all honor, will know that I have served Tash all my days and not him. Nevertheless, it's better to see the lion and die than to be Tisroc of the world and live, and not to have seen him. So he's acknowledging the goodness here. It's a conversion moment. It's a conversion moment. But the glorious one bent down his golden head and touched my forehead with his tongue and said, Son, thou art welcome. But I said, Alas, Lord, I am no longer son of thine, but the servant of Tash. He answered, Child, all the service thou hast done to Tash, I account as service done to me. This is benevolence. It's graciousness. It's the jovial magnanimity. Then by reason of my great desire for wisdom and understanding, I overcame my fear and questioned the glorious one and said, Lord, is it then true, as the ape said, that thou and Tash are one? The lion growled so that the earth shook. But his wrath was not against me, and said, It is false. Not because he and I are one, but because we are opposites. I take to me the services which thou hast done to him. For I and he are of such different kinds, that no service which is vile can be done to me, and none which is not vile can be done to him. Therefore, if any man swear by Tash and keep his oath for the oath's sake, it is by me that he has truly sworn, because he's sworn by a truth, for the sake of the truth. And it must be by Aslan, so that's what he's doing here. Whether you're in agreement with Lewis or not, he's dismissed the idea that he's promoting inclusivism. Not possible. He is suggesting that truth is truth. And there are better understandings of the truth, and in a holistic one. And this man now actually reveres, worships Aslan, just acknowledges what he was before, but this is his conversion moment, I think. And if any man do a cruelty in my name, then though he says the name Aslan, it is Tash whom he serves, and by Tash his deed is accepted. Okay, so those who speak in the name of Aslan, preach a false Aslan, act like the servants of those who are wicked, contradict the Tao in the name of Aslan. They do not serve Aslan. These are false. It's not that they can't do it, but when they do it, they also have to repent. There's no repentance, and on the contrary, in Christ's name, horrible things are being done. He's speaking into his experience in war. Not denying the genuine evil, but it is evil. When somebody does a traitorous thing, it is treachery, whether it's a Christian or not. Worse if it is a Christian, actually, because it contradicts the name and impugns the name of the God he allegedly serves. That's what's going on here. And he said, Dost thou understand, child? And I said, Lord, thou knowest how much I understand. But I said also, for the truth constrained me, yet I have been seeking Tash all my days. Beloved, said the glorious one, unless thy desire had been for me, thou wouldst not have sought for long, and so truly. For all find what they truly seek. Then he breathed upon me and took away the trembling from my limbs and caused me to stand upon my feet. There you go. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and the door shall be, right? So he's talking about pagan culture, and there's an element of a desire, the heavenly longing that's in there. It's in them. It requires Aslan to come to them, but still, they're not wholly bad. The God they serve is, but insofar as they serve truth, they are serving God. So it's a possibility. It's what God, Aslan here, can work with. Right? This is a man. He bears the imago Dei. Doesn't bear the imago Aslan-y. But right, he's a creature, a sentient being. Does that make sense at all? But it's all about, as I say, this whole of the last battle is about truth. Now, having said that, I mentioned at the outset, and I'm going to try and draw this to a conclusion now on this, that the great war and the losses that are inflicted in it and in the last battle give way when Tyrion dies to a jovial mood and a jovial view of life. And that is what Lewis and Tolkien have in their fiction as well. There's a vision of hope and a sense of beneath the darkness there's a light that's still shining, and they're moving towards this because, of course, their God, his character is not changed. False things are done in his name, but that doesn't contradict him. So Lewis is, he's doing apologetics for a generation that's been deceived by those in leadership, by those in the educational establishment, by the conditioners, by people who will send men into battle in their droves and stand behind and reap the benefits of it. That's what he's talking about. By the way, Lewis and Tolkien greatly admired the common soldiers in their midst. They were made officers because they were at Oxford immediately, going to the ranks of officers. The common men who were of such good character that both of them memorialize them is rather extraordinary. At any rate, so the Saturn character of Saturn, which begins the book, gives it its melancholy, contemplative, somber tone, and we can see that in the character of Tyrion. Although he realizes that the end of the world has come, he is nonetheless hopeful. Even if I die, at least I will then see Aslan. He never gives up his hope. It persists in them. He does not turn away from it. Even willing to give up his life in the end. And he's going to be lonely and he's going to be suffered. Well, this is what our experience is like. It's probably Jack Lewis's experience as well. He was lonely. Even though he had many friends, there was a sense of the world being against him. And Michael Ward comments that of all the biblical passages, the one that occurs most frequently in his writings is the cry of dereliction from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" This is that sense of being abandoned is, he says, most numerous. And so when he cries out when he's tied to the tree, "Aslan, Aslan, Aslan, come and help us now." But the darkness and the cold and the quietness went on just the same. Aslan doesn't appear. He doesn't answer his prayer, apparently. Does he give up hope? In spite of his desolation, he persists. "Let me be killed," cried the king. "I ask nothing for myself, but come and save all Narnia." And still there was no change in the night or the wood, but there began to be a kind of change inside Tyrion. Without knowing why, he began to feel a faint hope. And he felt somehow stronger. How has he been strengthened? By calling on the name of Aslan. But he didn't do anything. Right? He didn't do anything. So he felt abandoned. Then he denied himself. Don't save me. Then he awoke to meditate on that. And then he sensed the presence of Aslan in the midst of all these circumstances, all of which denied that he was there, and yet he felt by meditating on that he was there, and that kindled a hope in him which carried him forward then. In the end, Aslan doesn't come and help the way Tyrion wants. He sends 2 kids, but the king is strengthened for having called upon him. And that is the experience in which many of us are going to meet then. Calls upon God, apparent silence, not immediate answers to prayer, but there is always an answer to prayer. It just happens to be a quickening within. So anyway, contemplation, and again, reading from Michael Ward, this is page 206. Perhaps the most direct theological message of the last battle is that death is not the worst thing that can happen. Rather, direct quote from Narnia, "Noble death is a treasure that no one is too poor to buy." That was the message that was sent to him. It's a marvelous phrase. Noble death is a treasure that no one is too poor to buy. Inasmuch as the heroes learn this lesson, we witness another of the good effects of Saturn, a peculiar possibility offered by his influence. And what is that? All fortune is good, as Boethius said. Remember the Consolation of Philosophy I said was a key book? It is up to all fortune is good. It is up to the patient to choose whether to turn to it bane or blessing. But it's all good because it all comes from God. It's up to you whether you're going to make it your bane or are you going to make it your blessing. That's what Tyrion makes it, transforms it from being his bane to his blessing. And they learn that it's sweet and fitting to die for their country. They learn that, and they believe that, and they're willing to do that. And at that point, and when he persists in the end, Aslan praises him. Well done, faithful last king of Narnia. Right? So when it shifts to Jupiter, the imagery moves from ends to beginnings. It's no longer Saturn. The appearance that it's under the influence of Saturn shifts. His phrase is the donegality, never mind. It's a wonderful word. I'll write it down. The figure of Saturn shifts, and it shifts over to the sixth sphere, and the sixth sphere is that of Jove or Jupiter. And the spirit of Jupiter is fortunate, not infortunate, but fortunate. And this is the spirit that dominates the universe beyond the seventh, the resurrection home of Aslan, the Empyrean itself, the Caelum, Imperium habitaculum Dei et omnium the elect. That's the spirit of it. It's light, beneficent. In the third book in the sci-fi trilogy, That Hideous Strength, Saturn is overmatched by Jupiter. So he's arguing that throughout Lewis's fiction. Yes?
Yeah, why is it then in the Ptolemaic model that Saturn is the closest to the
well, because from the Earth it's the furthest out. But you're saying why is that? Because Jupiter overthrows his father Saturn in Greek mythology, and he's held to be a more benevolent ruler in some ways, but he's not the original ruler. So it's a little bit confused. If you want to, I'd say have a look at him on this, or you can again go to Lewis on the relation of Saturn and Jupiter. But Jupiter is Saturn's son. He rebels against his father, begins the descent of evil in some ways. Mark of the fall in Greek mythology is this primal rebellion. But he, in terms of his character, he is superior, and there's a goodness to Jupiter. Maybe Saturn is just a little bit too old, but he, in Lewis's work, Saturn yields to his kingly son. And he talks about it in that in his English literature in the 16th century, excluding drama, this magnificent literary work of literary criticism. He talks about this in relation to a poet by the name of Gavin Douglas as well. But in the last third quarter of the last battle, there's a shift that leads up to Tyrion's death. And at that point, then it moves to the further up and further in. And the formerly cold water is now deliciously cool. It's refreshing. It's not negative. It gives them refreshment. Everything is good there. They feel stronger. They can start flying. Right? And they're literally being transported, and they're being transported into a place that they cannot get on their own. Even Jewel, the flying unicorn, cannot fly. They're all flying. So I think it's a magnificent shift there. And at that point, then they are that famous phrase, the reason we love the old Narnia, because they find also Britain there. But the reason we love the old Narnia is it reminded us of this Narnia, the real Narnia. And so he's talking about the relation of stories and old ancient myths to the true thing. Everything that we truly love, everything that's good and lovely and beautiful, as the Apostle Paul puts it, all these things, you think about these things, they're all true, and truer than you can imagine. Because now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Right? So these are anticipations. These are in the shadowlands, but there is the fulfillment in that. And that becomes a dominant motif in Lewis's corpus of fiction and literary criticism and elsewhere. But it's his response then, I think this is correct, to that argument he had with Elizabeth Anscombe about apologetics, and thought, here's a better way to answer it. Because now I will include in my whole picture a view of history, and a view of love, and a view of myth, and a view of relationships, and of good and evil. Let me present it in its fullest form. This is the best apologetic, rather than in an argumentative fashion. Let's try it here. This is far better. And I think he's right. So he does, but he doesn't give up his argument in Miracles. He brings out a second edition and holds on to it because he thought it was true. He just thought, here's a better way to answer it. So it wasn't a retreat, let alone a reversion back to some sort of childhood trauma, as ridiculous as that suggestion is. And it's been made by several commentators. It's rather using the full force of his convictions, expressing them there. Anyway, we'll leave it off with that because we are done, and I'll see you next class. And what are we moving on to?